Griffins. Welcome to another episode of the Launch Sequence Podcast. This is episode 26. We are coming up at the end of November, middle of hype season for Star Citizen and gaming in general. And I wanted to bring one of the biggest and best hype men of Star Citizen to the show for today so we could talk a little bit about the game and what's been going on. Griffin, my friend, how are you doing, dude?
Pretty good. Doing well, my friend. Doing good. A kickoff of IAE, so can't get any better than that, right?
Yep. IAE's going on. CitizenCon just happened. Thanksgiving next week. Just one blow after another in November. Have you been playing much 315 recently?
Yeah, I dabbled in I usually, some people I know they stay away from PTU, but I usually try to get in and do a little bit of testing, just seeing where things are going. Did 3.15 and 1.1 when the new ships came out in vehicles.
Yeah.
And, as always, this was one of the longest runs we had in PTU. But it was, the one thing I will say that was very promising was CIG was constantly on dealing with patches every few days, if not every day at one point, just kind of finding things that the community was finding, getting those things fixed. And of course they were under the wire a little bit just because IAE was coming up, both for backers as well as new people who are being introduced to the game. So
right now,
I'm digging the patch. Yeah, I'm digging it. I mean, this one, the next one. I mean, you almost like to say that. The next one as well. But I actually am excited about what we've been seeing within 2021. It's been a good year.
Well, we're going to get real deep into that, talking about what we've been seeing in 2021, what we're going to see next year, where this game is in its life cycle, and kind of the feel of what's happening in Star Citizen right now. But first, I kind of want to dive back a little bit and see, we've spoken, I've been on your show a few times, but we've never really gotten to talk at length. Where do you come from when it comes to gaming? Like, are you did you come from tabletops? Have you always played video games? Did you start on consoles? Like, what's your history?
Do you remember when they used to make these like paper cards like this that they punched holes in and you put it in your computer and it fed it?
Yeah. I don't personally remember.
Time, right?
Yeah.
I know. I'm just being funny. I know that you don't know. No, that's actually where I started. I started way back in the days of when there were computer punch cards and COBOL and Fortran and Pascal and all that stuff.
Okay.
And C+, and that was my starting of computers in general. But then, of course, I got introduced to some of the large mainframe games that you would play that was, the graphics were literally on printout paper. And then eventually we went to the old EGA, VGA screens, monochromes. I went through all the computer period at that time. But of course, as a kid, seeing something called Pong started it. Grew up with the whole thing with pinball machines, and then ultimately the game called Space Invaders came out, which just ate everybody's quarters up, right? It was the first time there was an arcade standalone, this monitor, black and white, but we were excited about it.
Hype.
Yeah, exactly. And then there was the bouncing between what was arcade games and what was home, games. They weren't computer games per se. They were the simple consoles. But then eventually, PCs and the Mac, all these other things started to introduce gaming.
Yeah.
So I'll speed up the Wayback Machine, Sherman, and jump to, much more recent. In high school, I got into tabletop D&D, those type of things definitely captured my attention. And then I want to say, and it's bad because I'm getting old and forgetful, but I want to say that I got introduced to the Ultima series. Okay. There was a transition of seeing what was the tabletop games and D&D to these things that started talking about the computer. Zork was one of the games that I started out with, which was, text-based adventures.
Right.
And then moving beyond that, and that was Zork, and then it was the other stuff like that, Ultima Online.
My mother used to always tell me that was real gaming. She's like, I grew up with the text-based adventures. That's what gaming is.
Yeah.
Like, okay,
yeah.
Mom.
I mean, it's easy to be nostalgic like that, and there are times when I feel that way. But I think that it's not about gaming as much as what has happened in the gaming community that has shifted.
Yeah.
When you played games back then, your goal was to literally find every nook and cranny, find everything, and you bragged about, I spent 6 months playing this game, and it seems like now it's flipped the other way. We brag about I finished in 12 hours,
How many games?
so
yeah,
you know, so back then you didn't want the adventure to end. You know, you wanted it to continue. And that can kind of be a nice segue into Star Citizen, right? But from there, I was into flight things like Flight Sim. Back in the day, it was done by Sublogic. Of course, it went to Microsoft eventually. A lot of other manufacturers are putting out flight games. And then I want to say my first dabbing was probably, even though Wing Commander, I did do the very first Elite and very first Wing Commander. I didn't do any of the other ones. I never played Freelancer. And what's the other one? Freelancer and
I thought it was just Freelancer and Wing Commander.
No. There's the other Chris Roberts game that I'm missing out on, and somebody out there will give us a shout. I'm sure maybe one of the folks
in the
will tell us. Yeah, but I wasn't into any of those games for some reason. I think I played Wing Commander 1 and 2 maybe, and that was about it. I got into the Star Trek stuff. I was more into Star Wars and Star Trek, and I knew about Chris Roberts and I knew about those games. But beyond that, I want to say that beyond moving through the Star Wars period, what the game that probably caught my greatest attention, as far as space games, would have been Star Wars Galaxies. That game was probably the epitome of being able to have a space and a lore and a world that I was very familiar with, that I grew up with. And when I entered into it, it's almost like you didn't have to read the instruction manual. You know, we all knew Star Wars, so we recognized characters. You recognize the cantina. You know, you recognize the X-wing, and so it was very easy to step into that world. And of course, it was a world for most of us that we wished we could be in. So to have an MMORPG that fit that category for me was great. Weirdly enough, that snatched up more of my attention. I didn't get into World of Warcraft. And I don't know if it was just because, and I hate to say this, it's a great game. Something about the animation didn't pull me in for some reason. And maybe it's because I'm an older guy, so it kind of seemed a little bit on the kiddie side is the way it looked. But of course,
I get what you mean. I get what you mean.
You know,
it's the animation, and also, I mean, I don't know about you, but the setting isn't as interesting to me as something like Star Wars or Star Citizen.
Yeah, and maybe because the Star Wars was just more familiar for me to step into. You know, even though I've always loved fantasy. You know. Okay. Yeah. So D&D, when now when that died, when SOE and all the stuff happened with that, and they did the shift, I ended up. There was nothing really around. There was only one game around. And I used to see the advertisement for it all the time on the back of magazines, and that was EVE Online.
Right.
And I had always heard about EVE. Nothing bad. Only thing that I'd heard about EVE was that it had a very steep learning curve. And so since there was nothing else out there, I was like, okay, I've got the time. I dedicated all this time to Galaxies. Let me see what this EVE thing is about. And like many people, got into it. And of course, the learning curve is, I think, a bit difficult if you're not familiar with some things. But if you are, then it's easier to take on. Got into it, loved it, enjoyed it to death for I think I played for maybe 6 or 7 years. I want to say I got into it like maybe the second or third year that it started. And I remember when the 10th year anniversary came around, I was still playing it. And then I became very frustrated with EVE. And it was because EVE, if you remember in the advertising, and it's interesting because it's changed a bit now, but they promised a verse that you could go into that had all this deep lore, but that you could be these different things. If you wanted to be a trade person or entrepreneur, or if you wanted to be whatever, you know, you could do that. And as you know, EVE has these 4 races that are in the game. And so I was very steeped into thinking that a lot of that would be in the forefront of the game, the role play dynamic of it. When I got inside, I found out that it didn't make a difference whether you were flying in a Mars ship or a Galante ship. You could get shot by another Galante if you were a Galante, right? It didn't make any difference. And so a lot of that didn't hold for me. And then also the PvP dynamic of it, even though I don't mind PvP, I did mind that I had to spend more of my time PvPing than I could trading or whatever it was. You know, PvP always was there all the time.
It always went back to combat.
Always. And I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, I'm one of those people that I love doing mining in that game. But I didn't like the balance in it. If I was mining and if my org was mining in an area, if miners were getting blown up all the time, we weren't getting blown up for our resources, right? It wasn't like they were capturing our ships and taking them.
They were just coming to kill.
It was just for the leaderboard. And then that didn't bother me as much as it was that it had no impact on the economy. So if miners in a sector or system were being destroyed, you'd think that the prices of ships and things would, well, that didn't happen. So there was no other side to what happens to this action, and that bothered me a bit. And after a while, I got a little disenchanted with it. So I'd never joined one of the really big orgs. I was in moderate and small size orgs, and I had a good time while I was there. But after a while, it just I don't know. And then while I was playing that, a good friend of mine said, "Hey, have you heard about this game Chris Roberts is doing?" And so I hadn't. And I think I want to say I came in it was either November or December. It was right after the Kickstarter. And I started listening at that time.
Oh, so it was like immediate.
Kickstarters,
I'm sitting here thinking like, somebody was letting him know like a year afterward. This person's like heard it day one and was like, "Hey, did you hear about this?"
I wish. But even then, I was apprehensive. It was it was a new thing, and even though the project sounded intriguing, it was also ambitious. And you went, and back then, if you remember when you went to the website, it was not the site that it is now. And so, you didn't understand that this ship cost this and this was that. And, and so I held off. I don't think I jumped in until about maybe 6 months after that I started to have a better understanding. And I've been engaged and involved ever since.
So I loved that. Honestly, that was the best, I think, one of the best cross sections of a Star Citizen player I think I've ever heard, because I have heard different elements from your story like multiple times. Even on this podcast, people will come on here and they'll talk about playing Ultima Online. They'll talk about how Star Wars Galaxies was great, how it was very free and it allowed you to express yourself very well. They talk about, the kind of drought of space games and MMOs in general around that kind of 2008 to 2012 period. And it feels like the story of how Star Citizen came to be is kind of perfect timing. And the things that they hit on are a lot of those kind of things that you mentioned. I don't know if those were things you had in mind, but like the reputation and all that kind of stuff. So how has it felt so far in the last 8 years now, 9 years it must have been? How has it felt just watching it progress and seeing the different shifts and changes in this time cycle? Because we all have different experiences and opinions on it. I'd be interested to hear it from somebody of you've been waiting for this for a while.
It's interesting. I think having the background that I have, it is not the most high level background in any of the topics, but the fact that I did have some computer background and some gaming background and some other backgrounds. I've owned businesses before. Watching the journey of the development of this has been probably not much different than any other business, or especially successful business, where there are, successes, there are faux pas, right? There are shifts in direction. And CIG has experienced all of that. I've been there during the drought period, like you mentioned earlier. I remember we always joke around about this with Paul, about when we had that solid year of absolutely nothing, and for people who didn't experience it, it's hard to imagine when we get things quarterly now. Folks are marking about it being late a couple of weeks. And it's like a couple of weeks. How about waiting a year?
You're like, 2 weeks late.
And not only not getting anything, but not hearing anything that gave us anything to go on. I was there. Go ahead.
The worst was that we were still getting regular Around the Verse episodes, so we got to see like all this stuff that could be coming with like the 3.0 branches of stuff,
right?
But we don't know anything about like when it's actually. That was
exactly
rough.
It was rough. I was there in 2016 in LA when we thought we were going to get the vertical slice and see Squadron, and nothing happened, right? I mean, there's all these different experiences that happened in the past. I remember the issues. Remember when they had all the stuff that was subcontracted out to different contractors, and they had to scrap all that and reel everything in, and that was a revamping of how they were going to operate. And so I remember all the harking about the what do we call it when they keep adding things?
The scope creep.
We're right. It was feature creep, right? When that was a big deal, right? Feature creep, right? Now, and people were. I was there during the. I'll leave the person nameless, but the person who was, saying that this would not happen, and we'd have to hit 300 million in order for it to happen. I lived through all of that. I've lived through the education and miseducation of the backers, right? what we think is supposed to happen in development, what we've learned in development. And so, in retrospect, when you look back on, I've always joked around and said, I'll be sitting there telling our grandkids, I remember when we were,
oh, they'll be playing
3.7.
They'll be playing alpha. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, right.
Every YouTube comment tells me.
Exactly. But I, in retrospect, and because of that scope, I actually still feel good about what CIG has done. It is ambitious, and I'll make one more comment on that, and I'll stop. One of the things that is disheartening to me as an old player is what I said to you earlier about how the shift that has happened more with the game players than games. I feel, and I don't want to say this in an offensive way, but I'm going to say it in an honest way. I feel that in some ways, because the way the industry has produced games over the last maybe decade, maybe almost 15 years, maybe even 20, is that expectation of players has lowered, that we've forgotten what it's like to dream as gamers. We've gotten so used to what we know can be done and what has been done that we no longer pursue what could be possibly done, what might happen if we do something. And we see it when we have situations where there are games that we think, I love this phrase that comes out, it's a game changer, right? Game changer. What they did was change the games. They did do that, right?
Literally, yeah.
But it doesn't change the industry. It doesn't change what we've been getting. And we've seen games come out with, we've had great expectation to be good, whether they be independent games, whether they be games made by major AAA studios. And we've seen this reflected over the last few years. I'm not saying anything negative about these games, but I'm going to call them out because they're examples.
I'll say something negative about them.
Okay. Fallout 76, right? Fallout 76.
We
right?
are seeing it
Anthem.
Actively. Battlefield
Even
2042.
Cyberpunk. Right. Cyberpunk. I mean, and what I mean by that is these games come and literally within months go. You're not hearing any, don't get me wrong. People are still playing some of them. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely. And they're thriving in some cases.
Exactly. But where's the game that literally has flipped the script? You know what I mean? And I know that when we hear that, we've been told that so much on Steam, this is the game that's going to blah, blah, blah. And then we get disappointed and we keep getting disappointed. We keep getting burned. So then when a game like Star Citizen comes out and has somebody like a Chris Roberts, right, who says, I'm going to create this game that is like something you've never seen before. Well, guess what? That same tagline was used in the last Steam games that collapsed and didn't make it, right? So we've become cynical.
Yeah.
But we've become so cynical that we've also not left room for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, if there's anybody who could pull this off, maybe it's Chris Roberts. It's kind of like a George Lucas thing, right? Or Steven Spielberg or whoever, right? Or James Cameron. I mean, these guys are on a whole different level of what they do. And just like them, when they go to the studios tell them, you must be out of your mind. No, we're not doing it, right? And sometimes that's how the community is. We'll tell a developer, no, it's not going to happen. It can't be done.
we
too
we
ambitious.
Yeah.
I mean, think about gamers. The most imaginative people there are saying something is too ambitious. That's mind blowing to me, where we were the ones who wanted that level of ambition. We wanted somebody to push the limits, and deliver, not just talk it, but deliver it.
I think you made a good point there about the time that we're at in gaming. It's kind of a theory I've been playing with. And I think, honestly, it's not my theory. I kind of, took it, co-opted it, calling it my own. But just this idea that the gaming industry is at this place where it's like 60 years old or so. Like in mass appeal, video gaming is, 50 to 60 years old, I'd say. And it's gotten to this point where we had that like experimental phase, like you were talking about, where everybody's just trying to break things, get to the bottom of things. This is cool new technology. Let's really dig into this. And then it got commercialized. It got huge, 90s, 2000s. We got to this point where there was such great competition. There were genuinely good ideas coming out that people were changing the way the game played constantly. We were getting things like Halo Combat Evolved coming in and switching up the game on first-person shooters, Command and Conquer with RTSs, Assassin's Creed with platforming, just all these different types of games changing things up, and then it got boring. The last 12 years, like you go and you look and you say, what are some of the games that did that? for the industry.
Right.
And I'm thinking like Witcher 3.
Yeah.
There are obviously there's a handful of games out there that do it, but I do feel like we got to this point where the industry got big enough that it was making good money and everybody kind of got comfortable. Like all these companies got real comfortable with their recipes. And maybe we're just waiting for that point where it hits that same gap that movies did, where everybody gets the tools to make those movies, and suddenly we start blowing up with more ingenuity again. And I feel like Star Citizen's one of those representations that might be happening. And we see it in the indie industry all the time. And I feel like you just nailed that on the head, that a lot of people are consciously or subconsciously aware of this. We see that where people are sick of games. Like I said, we are actively watching Battlefield 2042 come out, and again, fall short of expectations. So it really is nice to see something like Star Citizen that expands on the games that you've talked about, Ultima, Star Wars Galaxies, even in some ways Eve, and bring something new to the table, even if it's a little unorthodox the way that they're doing it.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned about the companies and expectation. I remember when Electronic Arts first started. And when they first started, they used to, what they would always do is highlight the developers. When you opened it, their games came on a disc. It was like you opened it like a book, right? And inside would always be photos of the developers, telling you about them and telling you about the game. They said they went with the concept of like treating developers like rock stars, right? Like literally artists. And the focus was on, it was games made by gamers. That was their thing, right?
Yeah.
But once they were sold and things changed, and we get to the corporate model, right? It's like anything else, like music industry, any other industry. We start worrying about delivering our bottom lines for our investors, right? And so there's a part of the passion and heart that developers and game originators brought to the table, that even though they had to handle business well, when there's not enough of that in there, and I think that's one of the reasons why games like Elite or Star Citizen, when you have people who are truly gamers, who are at the head, not just at the development level, that hopefully you're able to still, try to strike that balance between running a business, which we cannot deny CIG is about making money. So please stop acting like they're not supposed to make money. Because they're a business, gang. They're a business. And at the same time, still have the heart to deliver a game that doesn't make us feel like they're just about money.
That is so key. Finding, that's perfect, man. Finding a balance between, like, obviously they want to make money. That's like, that's the whole point. Yes. Make your money, but finding some sort of a balance. Between like, wanting to make that money and also actually making something worthwhile, making some sort of art. And that's it's a good point. It's something else that people should realize, is that CIG is a business. And like you said, you've looked at their progress the same way that you would look at a normal successful business progress. And I think a lot of people miss that while there's a game being made that we're all watching and cheering on and taking part in, there is entirely a business side of it that we have nothing to do with. And that's what's making the calls about this ship goes this time and this planet's going this time and these gameplay features need to go in. And that kind of sucks. Not gonna lie. It's in the same way that it sucks that publishers are picking developer timelines. It's not fun that business is going to have to dictate how the game is made, but that's one of those sacrifices that I'm willing to make. If somebody else can come out with a better model to do what they're doing, I'll take it. I'll jump ship.
Interestingly enough, you were around back in the early days of, we had the old ATV and RTV. And people, in many ways, even though the production quality and everything wasn't that great, we had the faux pas, messed up mics and all this other stuff. There is that other side that made us still feel that was like they were our buddies, right? That there was this grassroots, part of the expression, feel to being engaged at that level, right? You saw those same 4 or 5 friendly faces up there every week talking to us, right?
Yeah.
And it's great to have that feeling and understanding that that's where we were. But as you mentioned, in order for the company to evolve, that was when we had 300 people, right? For a company that is now in excess of over 800, going on maybe, over 1,000, people working, that dynamic has to change. You know what I mean? We can't still have that old brick set with the models in the background and, you know, the camera and audio being crazy. You know, Disco said something to us at the last Bar Citizen that was really interesting. And he asked us, what was his job? What was his job? And he talked about that one of the major focuses of his job is to continue to build the relationship between the human side of CIG, the people that work there, and the community. That he spends a lot of time making sure that that connection is there. And I was saying this because of what you said a few minutes ago about how once we get to corporate and business, how most companies, that's lost. Remember when I said when electronic arts first started, they didn't highlight the company, they highlighted the devs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And man, that made, when I saw that, it even inspired me to say, man, maybe I want to learn how to do this coding stuff. You know what I mean? And so I think CIG has made a very smart move by making sure that we can literally go to a CitizenCon, sit at a bar, and talk to the devs, buy them a drink. They buy you a drink. The fact that they will sit there at a CitizenCon for 3 or 4 hours to sign every person's name or book and stop and talk to people. That level of personal touch can go a long way. And if people haven't experienced it, I want to encourage you, if you ever get to go to a CitizenCon, go to one. Even if it's a Bar Citizen, go to one of those. But man, I'm telling you, there aren't many companies in this, and I'm not throwing any shade, but I got a lot of friends in Elite who talked about the difference in transparency between Star Citizen and Elite. And both of those games have been like the two games that have been paralleling each other. Yeah. And I didn't realize, I've just assumed that Elite was just as open and, you know, telling their people, and they said, no. And I saw their, you know, their sheet or their roadmap. I was like, oh my God. And we've complaining about CIG not being transparent. You want to see non-transparent, go take a look at their thing and see, and you'll be like, maybe we need to give these guys a little bit more space.
In their defense, though, CIG does, or Frontier doesn't take their funding in the same way, right?
True, very true. But there are things that, you know, that they've both said, Braben and Roberts, and the people have been calling for, where is it? Yeah. And they haven't been telling people what they need to hear, you know. But, you know, like you said, they are two different development projects, because I agree. The fact that the backers are throwing the money in brings a higher level of accountability and transparency.
It does, yeah. I definitely want to see more.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So the fact that CIG does highlight the developers and sort of maintains a really good relationship between the community and the game, or sorry, the studio. This is something that seems to be becoming more normal, definitely with things like Discord being a more easily accessible thing. More community managers in games, specifically PC games, I would say are doing this more often, but overall gaming in general is becoming more community focused. Is this something you think that CIG can keep up? Because this game's going to blow up at some point, right? It's either going to go downhill or it's going to blow up. So if we're talking these conventions, you're renting out the LA Convention Center, you've got thousands of people. I'm wondering how scalable this is. At what point does it become too corporate?
Well, they're going to have to continue it. I think the relationship with community is going to have to be there, because it's a precedent that they've set for themselves. Right. I mean, if we all of a sudden heard, was like, well, there won't be any more Citizen Cons, man, they'll be railing in the streets, man. People will go crazy. You know what I mean? And let me share something about that. Think about the fact that we have conventions that people come from all over the world for a game that isn't quote unquote yet. You know what I mean? That's pretty serious. I mean, and they've been coming out like that, you know, for years, you know, and it's been growing each time we've done it. Right. So I think that I get your point, though. You know, I think last time we did, there were 1,800 people there. Are we saying that, you know, 5 years from now, there's going to be 5,000 people or 6,000 people attending an event? I know when I was with Eve, I literally, at that 10th year anniversary, I was about to fly over there for the convention, you know, that they have in Iceland. I really gave consideration to that. And they still continue to have both Eve Vegas and their main convention. So I think that personal relationship thing, regardless of size, they'll have to manage it and do well with it. But people evidently are willing to fly from Australia, Germany, wherever, right, to come to a convention, or from the States to go to the UK. People are willing to do it.
Well, I'm glad the precedent is set there, because I think that's a really cool thing. Like you were saying, I haven't been to a Citizen Con yet, and I'm gonna go to the next one. Yeah, the next one's gonna be huge.
And you're there, so you're gonna it's gonna be big.
It's gonna be crazy, because I mean there hasn't been one in 2 years now, right? And the game has grown so much. Wow,
absolutely,
that's gonna be wild. So let's talk a little bit about the recent history. This last year has been, now I keep telling people I've been pushing this as hard as I can. I talk about Star Citizen's development in phases. Some of the supporters who are currently watching us probably heard this spiel a little bit too much at this point, but I talk about it in terms of phases. And I feel like this year has been the shift of phases. Partially, I think, part of it was brought on by what we were talking about before. They went from being a very sort of like a candid operation, like you were saying, very, it was loose around the edges. The production value might not have been as well, but it had this really nice community feel to it, to being a lot more organized, feeling professional and feeling very put together. And I feel like that has been shown in the sales pages, in the marketing, in the trailers, in the website, in the features that have been being listed in the roadmap. And I'm wondering if you're feeling that sort of shift as well this year, or if this feels kind of just like another year, and maybe next year is where the big shift's going to be.
Yeah. No, I think that this year was different. Last year, there was still a lot of what I call wailing and gnashing of the teeth in the community to me.
We were an angry bunch in 2020.
Yeah, there was a lot going on. Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, COVID was going on and everything. Yeah. I think there was just some grace that was given because of that too. You know what? Thankfully, CIG was a company that was already operating to a certain degree that way, because of their global aspect. So their transition into that probably was a lot easier than some other companies that were just at one studio and they had to figure out a way to get everything so people could work from home. So actually it seemed like they said we didn't have such a difficult time because we were halfway there already. This year, I think, even when for example, we know that the drops are supposed to be quarterly, right?
Right.
I think that they've been pretty consistent. Yeah, they may go up a week or two, beyond the end of the month of the quarter, but that's usually been what it's been, right? And it's like I said, I was mentioning about this particular patch, how they've been really on it about getting things fixed. I think that there's going to be a bit more of a sigh of relief now, because we're seeing two things. The persistence dynamic has been brought on board even more than before. Before, you couldn't count on it.
Right.
And then secondly, the issue of the fixes for the tick for the 30Ks is going to help a lot, because I think for a lot of backers and players, even though it's testing, there was still frustration when you try to accomplish the most simple things to do and you would lose everything. And it's understandable. For my psyche, I never loaded a Caterpillar with everything because I didn't want to go out and start shooting people, right? So I just would never do it, right? Because I just knew I'd lose my mind. But I knew some people who faithfully would go and load it up. And then they lose it, then they go crazy.
It was like a test of faith. Like, what is that thing where the people who enjoy pain?
This masochism.
It's like, you guys, you were setting yourself up. Don't do it. It's like in Elite Dangerous when people say, "Don't fly without rebuy," right? Like, don't fly with stuff.
It's gonna happen. Well, unless you're ready to have it happen. And I'm one of those people that when stuff happens, I usually can come right back, play again, maybe 2 or 3 more times. If it's consistent, then I might say, okay, it's not, let me stop. They got to put a patch out on this, and write a ticket for it. But this year, I think, especially because of this now, I mean, we're at this point now going into 3.15, 3.16. Those two things have made playability for the game better for backers and even for people who may be coming in new. And I know you want to talk a little bit about, how is this game going to be perceived now? So I'll save that. But I do have a comment about what it comes down to people coming into the game now, what they need to be expecting. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I do. Yeah. The stability is this game is, I think, developing at it's kind of slow still, but it's a decent rate. And I feel like if the game was running smoother, like you said, like maybe we get some performance, we get Gen 12 and we get server meshing, and it's running smoothly, like you're not dealing with constant glitches, you're just dealing with the lack of features. I think this game is going to be a lot easier for people to stomach on a normal basis. Like the people who want to play but maybe get frustrated all the time, that could definitely make this a normal playable like regular game for a lot of people if they fix those things. The 30K protection, that's a huge addition. That could definitely go a long way to that.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and say it now since you just said that.
Yeah.
I think one of the dangers now is that there are people who are coming into the game. If you were around back in the day, you know, when alpha meant something to you in your head, then you kind of get it, right? I mean, you know, even, and I hear people say, well, they need to quit using it as an excuse that it's alpha. Well, until they call it beta, it's alpha. You know, that's it, right? And most of us as gamers never have access to an alpha game. So let's call it for what it is. We usually get it at beta, sometimes early access, whatever. But a true alpha, most of us have never had to deal with, right?
No.
So much of our frustrations is just because of the alpha state. I always struggle with this thing about, is it a game? And I struggle with it because there are times I can go in and play it and it feels like a game. You know, I mean, I might get into a session 2, 3, 4 hours. Nothing goes wrong. Anything I wanted to do, I was able to achieve. And it felt like a game, right?
You're like, this is the best game ever.
Then there are the times when I'll go in and stuff's not working. And I know there's the default to want to say things are broken, but I also have to say it's still in development. It's not finished. So it's not a game. That's what goes through my head then. Yeah. So I'm in this dichotomy. You know, I have these two different feelings about the game. My fear now, though, is that because, and you mentioned this, because of the successes, not just the beauty of the game now, but I mean the fact that people are able to play it, that will get people coming in, Free Fly Week, for example, or whatever, and not understand that regardless of how good it looks, it is still in development. And I worry a little bit about, because it's kind of funny, you know, Star Citizen weirdly does, in its own way, has its own high learning curve. Because there really is no great tutorial and, you know, all this other stuff. You know, you just got the little keyboard map and after
they
that,
just
forget
throw
it.
you in, and show you hints at random times.
And so so think about learning that, but then think about learning all the weird things that we've learned over the years on how to get around in the game, the things that we do without even thinking about them as a workaround or whatever. And then you get somebody who comes to the game who has no idea that those things are there. And they could be still frustrated, even with the new fixes that exist in the game. So I think that we don't hear about development alpha as much these days. And I'm worried that people may come in thinking that, you know, we look at those advertisements and trailers and wow, it looks like, oh, let's do that. And it can still run into some of those roadblocks.
I actually said just that in my 315 review. I put it out this morning. And in that review, there's a line that says something along the lines of, just remember that this game is an alpha. Even if it doesn't tell you, even if sometimes it seems like it's not, through the marketing, through the trailers, through what they say is in the patch, it is an alpha. And you're right, because we already see that. We already see people hop into the game and ask, like, why can't I do this? You're like, it's not, it's, the features isn't in the game yet. That's really dumb. Why haven't they put it in the game? That's stupid. The game's not finished. And then they're like, what do you mean it's not finished? Like, why did I buy it? And I'm just like, oh boy. And you know, part of that is on them. They like, people have to read. People have to do a little bit of research. If you Google searched what is Star Citizen on Google, I'm pretty sure it tells you it's a game in development. On the website's front page, I don't know if they've changed it yet. I looked at this about a month ago, and this actually really annoyed me. There was only one mention, I think, of it being an alpha, and it was on the button. And I went and I looked at other websites to see, you know, how do other games do it? A lot of games make it really obvious. So I do think that our CIG could make it more obvious on the front page, but I do think you're right that we're going to end up with even the people who know it's an alpha are going to get used to playing it and having not as many problems. So those glitches will be worse. That's going to be an interesting period.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that being said, I guess, what are you expecting next year? What is your
Ooh,
grand
you want my
vision.
crystal ball
Yeah,
prediction?
let's get
See
into
whether or
the
not
exciting
I
bits.
sink my reputation or not.
You put your name on this. We
Okay,
will
I've
hold
said
you. I'm
this
going
on.
to clip this and put it on YouTube.
Yeah, I've said this on our show, and I'm willing to stick my neck out on this.
Okay.
I honestly feel that CIG, that next year for them is their 10th year official, from 2012,
Right.
from Kickstarter. Okay,
Yeah.
from Kickstarter, and they have to deliver something major next year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not going to be Star Citizen, and I'm really big about this. Yeah, I'm really big about this thing of making sure we distinguish the difference between Star Citizen and Squadron 42 and what was promised, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the railing and the gnashing of teeth was really about Squadron 42.
Yeah,
that
the
was the
delays
original
and
vision. Yeah, that was the original vision. That's what dates were given about, not Star Citizen. Dates were given about Squadron 42.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, though, the industry and even backers will use that term simultaneously, Star Citizen, and say Star Citizen is delayed. Star Citizen is not delayed.
Yeah.
Squadron 42 is what we're waiting on. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think I said that in a video or something. Like Squadron 42 is the Star Citizen that's not called Star Citizen. It is every time somebody wants to talk trash about Star Citizen, they talk about Squadron 42 and then just call it Star Citizen.
Exactly. So, and for the record, CIG has made it clear that Star Citizen will be like Eve. It's going to be that ongoing thing that they continue and build and add to. But because it runs parallel with Squadron 42, there are a lot of identical things in both. So I honestly believe my thing is that let me start with Squadron first. Mm-hmm. I believe that we'll hear about Squadron next year. We'll either see a trailer or a launch date or something. Bold. My guess is CitizenCon of next year. I used to base it around like the industry stuff, like maybe Gamescom or something, like they would do it at something like that. Mm-hmm. But I don't think they have to now. I think if they announced it at CitizenCon, it would blow up just as much in industry. So
yeah,
because even right now when patches come out, all the game magazines, the packages, the different patches now. So I think that next year, 2022, they will announce or show a trailer, and it will either say coming in 2023 or spring of 2023 or something along those lines. That's my guess. Okay. Mm-hmm. Maybe even Christmas of 2022, right?
Oh boy!
But I know. But there's some other factors there, right? We're going to probably be in LA, which would be a great place for them to do that launch. And so I think that that's what's going to happen in relation to Squadron 42.
Okay.
As far as Star Citizen goes, I think that we're going to, as you know, most of the years that we've had behind us were about creating the tools, building the foundation, right? And like any building, you dig down deep. It takes a while. Everybody's down in the hole. You can't see what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Then once you start building the building, it gets thrown up really quick. And so I think that the expansion that we've seen with the studios, we've seen the new purchase of the building over in the UK. We've seen the opening of the studio in Canada, extra hiring that they're doing of employees. They're focused on Squadron 42 and shifting toward that. Chris going over to the UK to make sure that Squadron 42 is getting tightened up now. Mm-hmm. A lot of signs of things that we're seeing that say that that's the direction they're moving in. Lastly, I think that I'm supposed to have a Zoom call right now. That's weird.
No problem.
Anyway, lastly, I think that there are a lot of assets that CIG has done and worked on. If you noticed in the trailer that they just showed us, ISC yesterday, mm-hmm. and also at CitizenCon, they showed us Pyro 4. They even mentioned it, that it's Pyro 4.
Comfy with that.
So my belief is, and we know that they haven't been sitting around waiting on systems until server meshing comes in. They've been working on that stuff. It's just whether they can put it into the game. So I'm hoping that what we will see is that we'll start seeing systems being delivered to us, not planets, right? Not moons, but systems being dropped, so that we might see every quarter a new system, 2 systems being dropped at a time. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen next year completely, but I think that once the meshing, like you said, all the other pieces that need to happen in the pie, right? The meshing, Vulcan, all the other stuff that happens. Mm-hmm. I think that once that stuff's in place, and of course the player counts going up, because that's crucial too. Yeah. Then I think we're going to start seeing, because not to be funny, there's a lot of real estate in Stanton. Yeah,
there's a ton of space.
And I've always said, Chris said 100 systems. If he puts 20 systems in, we're going to be busy for a long time, let alone freaking 100 systems based upon how the real estate is. If you look at the planets and moons and all these systems, there's so much real estate in space. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So 100 systems puts us freaking 30 years down the line,
right?
In the sense of how long. But that's my thing. I think that Squadron 42, next year's announcement, and that we're going to see acceleration even more. The meshing and all the other stuff comes in of these systems coming in.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. I think you probably are a little more optimistic than I am in terms of when they'll ramp up, but it feels like there are two like main measures of growth: the systems and the players. Like, I think most people would care more about the players than the systems, but
yes,
I'm right there with you. I'm hoping that after next year, when we get the first star system, we never go another calendar year without seeing a new star system in the game. So if we're getting Pyro in 22, I'm expecting Nyx in 23, Terra 24, Magnus 25, however it needs to go, expanding from there. But I don't think they should ever fall short of where they start when it comes to the systems, because they do need to get working. And I think the 100 system thing is freaking crazy. I'm so tired of people quoting that, because looking at what they're doing with the, I mean, if there's anything I've realized in the last month, it is that they are looking at these star systems as something so much bigger than just another area. They are building new lore, new characters, new factions, new space stations, new, like, everything, narratives. I think they're gonna make a really big themed updates out of new star systems, and we're probably never going to see 100. Maybe we will. We probably will. But like you said, decades.
Well, to your point, imagine if they put out, and I'm just saying, if they put out, and I know I'm being ambitious here. Let's say there was one system per quarter. We're still talking about 5 years. We're talking about 2 systems per quarter. We're talking 10 years. You know what I mean? Just to get to 20. I'm just saying, like you said, we don't have to have 100. It'd be great. Don't get me wrong. But you hit on some really cool stuff. There's stuff in the game that they aren't going to even tell us about that they're putting in. You know what I mean? Stuff that we're going to discover, or maybe other races or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's ships we haven't seen. You know, there's all this stuff. And I think that sometimes we have this narrow view based upon what we have in our hands right now. And we underestimate the fact that they're thinking way beyond. And that always blows me about CIG anyway. Every time I think I know what they're going to do, they always take it. Who was it who said this? Was it Michael Jackson? It was Michael Jackson. Whenever he would work with his musicians and they would come up with something and it would be really cool, he would always say, "That's really cool, man. I'm digging it. But you need to take it even further than that." He would always push his people around him to think even further, because sometimes you think you're being innovative and creative and all you're doing is doing a variation on something else and you just don't realize it. To come up with something that nobody's ever seen takes a lot of work. You know what I mean? It just doesn't just happen. So I think that even though we know about certain races, right, in the lore and things like that, who says we're not going to stumble on something when we get into some other system that we've never heard about, that's not in any of the wikis or anything? You know,
because when people are talking about these systems, they're not talking about the actual space. That's what I was saying. I think people care more about the people expanding rather than the systems. Because if you could say, "Hey, we're going to bring 10 new star systems in, and you get a new architectural type in each of those star systems," but you're not actually getting a new game system until that 10th one. That could have been added to the first star system. You didn't have to create 10 star systems to have that game system. So the amount of value that we'll get from this game doesn't depend on the amount of star systems they're adding. I think people need to get off of that mindset and start thinking about the over-encompassing direction that this game is moving in, which is detail on a pretty large scale.
That's right. Absolutely. And the detail in here is ridiculous. I'm still blown away. I tell people stop running and walk through the game sometime, because there's so much stuff that, I mean, we get so used to it, but man, there's some stuff I've seen sometimes and I'm like, I can't believe they actually, and I know there are people who also hate that. They're like, why are they wasting time putting the manufacturer's name on that screw? I mean, I get it. You know, I do get it.
Yeah.
But it's some amazing stuff in there too. Some of it's really amazing.
There is a level of detail in this game, and it's a gray line. People probably aren't going to enjoy what I'm about to say, but I do think that sometimes Star Citizen goes a bit too far on some things. There are a few features. I was debating whether or not I was going to talk about this yesterday. I guess I'll say it. It's the podcast. Only a few people are going to hear it.
Okay, go ahead.
Specifically, boat parameters and flak ammo are two things that have stood out to me this year, seeing on the progress tracker. Neither of those things are things that I don't want to see in the game. Both of them are things that I highly doubt were planned more than 2 years ago. I just can't see. Maybe we have had. I mean, we had flak. I think we had flak ammo going on in the Squadron 42 cinematic trailer. That first one. That was, I think, the first time I remember seeing it. But it's not. I don't think it's very important to the MMO aspect of the game. That being said, maybe it's not much extra. It's not much extra effort, but it falls into this bag of features, along with, like I said, boat parameters, where I'm like, I'm sure they have something great and amazing planned for that. But I just don't think it's a good time for it. And again, that's opinion. Everybody's got their opinions on that. Some people think it's not time for the medical system. I think it is time. So, we're right and wrong either way. Right. But I do think that Star Citizen can go a bit far with some things. Generally, I don't care about, like you said, putting a manufacturer, like stuff that adds to the lore is pretty nice. But sometimes it does get to me. That being said, like you said, dude, what they're building is unmatched. And they go in, they put something down, and then they go back to it, and they're like, nah, let's take this further. Like they did thruster volumes that did the dust on the ground when you were near the ground, and they said, no, never mind. Let's model it for every thruster so that it looks different based on what you're doing. Yeah, it's amazing stuff they do. It is incredible. But I've had you here for quite a while, so I want to ask you one more question before we close up today. And that's going to be kind of like the last question we had. What is the one major feature you want to see next year?
Ooh. I want, boy, that's a tough one.
It is.
Okay, well, let me base it upon what we know, or we're pretty sure that Pyro's coming in.
And you can give multiple if you'd like.
So I want to see player increase. Okay. I want to see more players in the game. For a lot of reasons. Even right now, Stanton is a big system, and it's a very empty system. NPCs are great, and the fact that they're coming alive and working properly is very nice because it makes the world feel better. But even when you're in a full server in Stanton, depending on where you are, you may not see anyone for the whole time that you're there. You can go from your hab to your ship and maybe not pass anyone at all. And I know the next number they talked about was something like 100. But I'm looking forward to when we have way more people in the server, because I think you still need to have that human interaction piece is still important, not just in the sense of meeting up with your friends, but also when I go in G-Lock Bar, I'd love to see people in there hanging out because they're waiting to friends, whatever, I want to see those social interactions happening more in the game. I'm a little disappointed. Don't get me on my speech about that. But yeah, if there was something I'd be looking forward to, it would be definitely player counts going up, when we get Pyro. But again, when you add Pyro, which is bigger than Stanton, it's still going to feel empty. Even if you go to 100, 200, 500 people, it's a lot of space out there. But that's probably the biggest thing that I would there are other things, but I just want more players to be able to come in and enjoy each other and have a good time playing.
I want it to feel more like an MMO.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I get that. Absolutely. That is, I was just thinking actually, as you were saying that having more players would be nice, because then there'd be more materials moving around, like more people running cargo, which means maybe more people are trying to run bounties or piracy. So it would be nice to see how increasing the player count would actually affect the game. Because when I think about that, I'm also then like, well, don't they say that they're linking all their resources and everything between the servers? So that might not actually matter. It might be the overall number, but I don't really know. That's one of those things that I think we're all wondering about when it comes to things like server meshing, and just wait until next year to see.
Well, how many people, not to be funny, with the addition of all these new multi-crew ships, right? We're talking about the Redeemer's in with 5 people, right? The Hammerhead is 8 people. You know, I'm just saying you could have 6 ships, 5 ships, and they filled the server up just with 5 ships of people in the game. You know, and I mean, nobody's even on a moon or planet because they're all in their ships. And but you know, we've got to get more people in there. To me, that's the big thing.
And really splitting that up with server meshing might help a lot. I mean, as they've been saying, but we'll see how that all goes. It's next year is. I mean, this year was an exciting year. Next year is going to be It could be monumental. There's a lot to look forward to. But that about wraps it up for us today. Griffin, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know we had a lot of weirdness going on with the scheduling, but glad to have you on for the talk, man. This is a great freaking talk. We touched on a lot of good subjects here. You have one of the friendliest communities in all of Star Citizen, in my opinion. Every time I come into Soul Citizens, feels super warm, super welcoming, super inviting. Please tell the people where they can find that group, where they can find you, and what you guys are doing in the game.
Yeah, well, no, we appreciate that, and we're always happy when you've been on the show. Folks are always excited. Space Tomato's coming. Yes, he's going to be on the show. We're the Soul Citizens, and that's SOL, and of course, Citizens with an S. You can find us on Twitch. You can find us on all the platforms. YouTube, if you want to see some of our older videos, and of course Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. We even have a group in Facebook, and basically we've got a really cool team of people. Some folks have been in the game since literally the Kickstarter. We've got other folks who've been in the game just a year and a half, and so it gives great perspective from all the different co-hosts that are on the show about the progress of the development. And we try to keep it, you know, even though, you know, we don't white knight it, but we are trying to be positive about this. And I think it's more just because, you know, we, to a certain degree, everybody, no matter where they are, wants to see this game succeed, right? We can be frustrated, we can be aggravated, we can feel a little bit tired. But we all want to, we are hopeful, and not just because we have money backed into it, but it's about what we're seeing happening in gaming. I think you alluded to this earlier. You know, we want to see something different and something better in gaming, and we're hoping that this is probably the closest thing that we see that could possibly make that happen. So try to stay as real. Now, we have our criticisms too. There are times when we get into our debates about the game, but at the same time, we really are trying to cheer on what CIG is doing. And maybe some of that comes from the fact that we've met the people that work there, and we know that they are serious and diligent and just as fervent about wanting this game to be good as we are. Yeah. So.
And they're people. They're not they're not machines. They're people. They like this stuff. They you know, they're working their job. But I appreciate that you guys are doing that, because honestly, the journey is going to go one way or another. You can decide to be either annoyed and bitter during that journey, or you can be positive and excited. Doesn't mean that you can't be criticizing or suggesting changes, but trying to err towards the side of positivity generally does better for your health. So solid approach.
Yeah. And nothing, and to your point, let me say this too. You know, critiquing is good. You know, the fact that CIG, they'll tell us that they read the forums. They pay attention to what's out there. I can't tell you how many times they said, we listen to the streamers, we're watching, we're doing. A lot of companies aren't doing that. They're just doing what they want to do. So, you know, keep it on the real, you know, keep it respectful. But tell them, because our voices, we've changed things. We've taken struts down on ships. Yeah,
they do. They've changed.
Done,
just as recently, they just tried to experiment with one of the ships because of some feedback, and you know, they went and they gave it a shot. It didn't work out with what they had planned for the game, so they reverted it. But they do that, and it's not even. Griffin mentioned the streamers. I know some people think that these game companies will get streamers and creators into a group of room and figure out only what they want. It's not just that. They hop into Reddit. I see them on Reddit all the time. They're on Twitter. They're in Twitter, Discord servers. I literally had CIG Dev hop into this podcast during the episode where we were talking about what they were working on. These people they're definitely listening. So if you want to be part of a community, I just said it in the video this morning, but this is a great freaking community to be part of in terms of gaming. And Soul Citizens is a fantastic group to get in touch with if you're going to get into it. So
thanks again, so much, man. Appreciate that. Sundays at 8 p.m. Eastern. I forgot to say what time.
Sundays at 8 Eastern. And is there a link for that?
Yeah, Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, it's twitch.tv Soul Citizens. And you can find us on YouTube, same thing, youtube.com/Soul Citizens. And yeah,
Cool.
that's how you find us.
Cool. And we'll have all that stuff in the show notes so you guys can click right through. Guys, 26 weeks in the back pocket. This podcast has been going. I am so grateful to everybody who listens. We just passed 3,600 plays in total. There's more than 100 people listening to this podcast regularly, so it has blown both me and my wife away. Nice. I want to thank everybody who has jumped in and started listening and interacting. And if you're watching on YouTube, you as well, thank you so much. If you are watching on YouTube, consider checking out the audio podcast. There are no ads there. We keep it ad-free. It's all supported by our patrons, lovely supporters over at patreon.com. Thank you so much. Also, the ability to support down below through different means, however you want to, but it does help us keep the audio podcast ad-free for anybody who wants that experience. So, guys, I hope you've been enjoying the podcast, the launch sequence. I hope you've been enjoying the year, and I hope you enjoyed this talk. It was a fantastic one once again, Griff. Just wanted to give a last shout out, and well, we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.